welcome to those of you who've joined us in the Elliott Room for this last panel before we go into the back into the plenary session for a closing keynote and a closing panel. So in this room, we've talked about grids, we've talked about AI, and now we are introducing the panel on the social dividend, investing in the energy transition for people and prosperity. So with that in mind, I'm going to invite Lily Beadle, Associate Director at the Carbon Trust, who will be the panel moderator and the panelists. Over to you.
Fantastic. Well, welcome everybody, and thanks for joining the session. First reflection is that a number of sessions today, I've heard the words just transition, social dividend, and discussions around it. So I think that's pretty positive for an energy conference, which is great. So the context that we're looking at today is around social dividend and just transition, which in the context of an energy transition represents a vision of a future where the shift to renewables not only mitigates climate change, but also creates a fairer, more prosperous world for all. So how can we make sure that the benefits of this are far-reaching, and can we, through our investments, advance climate and environmental action, improve socio-economic distribution and equity, and increase community involvement and buy-in? So the aim for us for today is to discuss some of the themes around all of that, and to bring some concrete examples from our work where social dividend is being considered. So yeah, I'm Lily Beadle. I'm Associate Director at the Carbon Trust, and my work at the Carbon Trust in the world of social dividend has kind of taken two different routes. One is looking at the UK as to how we can lower the cost of energy through innovation. And when I talk about innovation, I also talk about the integration of that innovation, not just the cool bits of tech. And then a large part of my career has been spent on thinking about energy access and how we bring clean, modern, and reliable energy to all. So I'll ask over to the panel for some introductions. As you introduce yourselves, can you introduce your name, your organisation, and then also share what a just transition means to you and how you incorporate it into your work? So we'll start with Priya.
Hello, I'm Priya Shankar from Bloomberg Philanthropies, where I work on our global climate programs. And at Bloomberg Philanthropies, we support work in 700 cities in 150 countries around the world. And our mission is to ensure better and longer lives for the greatest number of people. And this is what really underpins all of our work, led by our founder, Mike Bloomberg, UN Special Envoy for Climate Ambition and Solutions. We know that climate change impacts the most vulnerable communities the most. They really bear the brunt. We also know that transitioning to the clean energy is the most impactful thing that we can do in terms of tackling climate change. But it's not just about climate. It also brings huge benefits in terms of people, benefits in terms of health. Air pollution causes over 8 million deaths a year and shares many of the same causes as climate change. Benefits in terms of jobs. According to IRENA, there were 16 million jobs in the renewable energy sector last year, and this number has been rising. And benefits in terms of energy access, which Lily was talking about. There's still 750 million people around the world lacking access to electricity. And by spurring clean energy development, it's the fastest way to bring electricity to those people and all the opportunities for prosperity and development that come with that. We started our work on clean energy transition in the US, expanded to Europe and other advanced economies, and are now also working in developing countries focused on improving lives for communities. And through our work, especially in developing countries, I think we increasingly see that just transition isn't only about ensuring that existing polluting jobs that are being lost are replaced, but it's also about ensuring that new green jobs for the future that bring opportunities are created.
Fantastic, thanks. And over to Chris.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Lloyd. I'm an offshore wind advisor with the World Bank's Offshore Wind Development Programme, and I also work for Ocean Energy Pathway, which is an organisation promoting the uptake of offshore wind. I've been working in offshore wind now for over 20 years, and so I have, when this question is posed around, you know, what does a just and equitable transition look like, I kind of cast my mind back to when I started. You know, these sorts of questions weren't really asked. Really, when we were developing offshore wind farms 15, 20 years ago, the reason we were doing offshore wind was, you know, three reasons really. One for climate change, one was for energy security, and a third was for investment and economic benefit. And what seems to have happened over my career is that we've sort of lost touch with two of those, which is the climate change bit and the energy security bit, and now we're really thinking about, okay, what is the economic benefit of these sorts of renewable energy investments, and how do we target them? And I think just going back in history, there's a reason why it has been like that. You know, 15 years ago, if you were promoting an offshore wind farm, you had to make the case for that offshore wind farm. A developer had to go out there and sell why that offshore wind farm should be built. What was it going to bring to the community, to the power system, to the country? And particularly in the UK, that was sort of established practice up until about 2010, when the government proactively put in place some national policy statements. They produced 5 national policy statements, and one of those effectively established the need for renewable energy as an outright. And from that point onwards, you didn't need to make the case for renewable energy. And so for the last 15 years, certainly in the UK, we've sort of lost track of selling why we're doing this a little bit. And I think we've been caught a little bit flat-footed, and that's now why we're having these sorts of conversations about, okay, what is a just transition? Whereas if you'd have asked me that 15 years ago, it would have been, well, all of the key things, because the industry was so used to promoting what the just transition and what an equitable just transition is, because it was inherent in promoting these projects. So now I sort of try and answer that question now, what does it look like? And I think, okay, so we know that renewable energy investment brings lots of good things to economies. And I think sometimes those benefits are not well directed and not well guided. And the focus really for me when I think about an equitable and just transition is, okay, we know that there's a lot of investment, we know it creates lots of jobs, but are those jobs really going into the right place? Are we making efforts for things like skills development? Are we making sure that vulnerable communities are well engaged and able to benefit from them? And so it's this sort of nuanced look of targeting and directing and focusing those benefits so that they do create the impact in the places we want them to create the impact.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Lily. My name is Giampiero Nacci. I'm a managing director at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, responsible for the work we do on climate and nature finance. I don't know how many of you know the EBRD, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Do I need to explain? No? Great. So you all know. Fantastic. This saves me a couple of minutes. So let me start by saying that let's say we have 3 key priority pillars in our strategic approach to our business and the countries we serve and the clients we support. It's about corporate governance, improved governance. It's about inclusion, human capital development, and it's about the green agenda more in general. I'm mentioning these 3 because there is a correlation, and there is dimension of just transition across all these 3 areas, 3 pillars. I'm responsible for the green part, so I'm going to talk mostly about it. In the green parts, we have a strong focus on financing green projects, predominantly climate-related investment, but also other environmental type of interventions. And it's a very core part of what we do. Last year, 58% of our business volume was about green investment. And this mobilized twice as much private capital towards the project we financed. So it's a substantial amount. And the reason why we're focusing on green is because we are a market-oriented organization. We want to use private channel to foster economic growth and sustainable development. And we see the climate climate change, biodiversity loss as under the lenses of a market failure. So we connect investments in green economy, in climate investment, as a part of competitiveness, growing the competitiveness of the countries which we serve, but also to create new jobs and to create economic development. So that's the reason why we prioritize green. And of course, there are multiple elements that come along, resilience, and a resilience economy is a competitive economy, and so on and so forth. So how just transition feature into that? There are, I would say, three dimensions. On one side, we operate in a region. It's a very diverse region that EBRD operates, roughly speaking, from Morocco to Mongolia, from Estonia to Egypt, and we're now, moving to Sub-Saharan Africa. But there are a number of countries which have a strong dependency on fossil fuel. Entire communities, entirely dependent on fossil fuel. So we look at, the perspective of just transition in the context of how to support these communities to move into a different economic model. So we tend to have a operational at least, a relatively narrow perspective, which is quite in line at the end with the Paris Agreement. So it's about, how you support this community moving on and let's say, moving to different economic model. And in that respect, I have one example that perhaps gives a bit the notion of what we can do. It's North Macedonia, a relatively small country in the Western Balkans. So we supported the countries developing a just energy transition platform, which entails three elements. It's about closing of coal mines and fossil fuel assets, so closure of 2 coal power plants that provides the bulk of the electricity for the country by 2030, so very ambitious. Then there is a component about development of the enabler for renewable energy, so it's the grid, it's the storage, it's the flexible capacity, it's the market instruments, and then there is a big chunk about renewable energy development, so attracting also private capital to solar and wind power generation. How the just transition feature, you can link, climate ambitions only if you really also work and develop the political economy, consideration into this type of platforms. So there, what we do is supported the affected communities quite narrowly, but still, very focused on reskilling, upskilling jobs. We supported the cost of rehabilitation, the closure and environmental remediation of these coal assets, using also international funds through the Climate Investment Fund. But also, crucially, we introduce, and we're introducing, it's still ongoing, it's still under implementation very much, credit lines with local commercial banks to support the economic diversification piece, like offering loans to small, medium-sized companies, to local entrepreneurs. So the combination of these factors doesn't necessarily solve the problem, but provides, though, an integrated solution to address the problem. And maybe last point, which may sound slightly controversial, we also prefer operationally to keep this narrow perspective, because the just transition concept can be broadly taken into account, but we believe there is also material risk a bit to dilute the agenda, and to ultimately lose a bit the focus on what ultimately can achieve results. And I'm happy to elaborate on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Kate Huber from the Carbon Trust, Senior Manager in our innovations team. And I head up a lot of our work that we do with just and inclusive transitions. So what the just transition means for us is, I think, has evolved quite substantially over the last few years. And I was, quite struck by, Michael Ray's opening keynote to, say that it's about sharing in the benefits. Which absolutely I agree with, and I think it's taken a bit of a journey for us to kind of recognise, as an organisation, the work that we do and the impacts that we have, socially. And I think in defining it, it's, as I say, it's kind of evolved, and it's highly context dependent. And I think Priya and fellow panelists have sort of picked up on this in various ways. But not only in sort of a geographic sense, how costs and benefits are kind of distributed from a renewable energy project or a coal transition project, varies very much on sort of the social structures that exist, the power structures within those societies. But even within the organizations that are enacting these changes, we work with a vast array of different organizations to do our projects, and trying to help them define what just transitions means for them is also a really difficult and challenging task. For example, we work with a lot of financial institutions and corporates, and as we see things like transition finance become more prevalent, defining what just transition means as part of transition planning can also be quite sticky. And I think related to this notion that there isn't really a core definition yet, there isn't really this way of saying, you've got this right or you've got this wrong. There's no kind of, so accountability sort of comes into that a little bit. But yeah, so I think because of that, there's a sort of a reticence, there's a sort of a nervousness for a lot of clients, especially from the corporate sphere, who don't want to be a first mover in this space and sort of say, yes, we're doing this or the other on just transitions. There's a sort of a kind of a, if you can't get it right, don't do it at all kind of attitude. And I think for us, we don't want perfect to be the enemy of the good. The most important thing is to, with the energy transition, is just to move and to do something. Thanks.
Fantastic. So to dive into a bit more of those details, we've heard examples from across the globe, but I think one unifying thing that's come out from a lot of that is there's a lot of challenges with it. So I'll go to you first, Priya, to ask, what do you see as the biggest challenges when considering social dividend and just transition? Diving into some of those examples that you brought up in your introduction.
Thanks, Lily. And I'll kick off with actually sharing a few more concrete examples and then draw some of the challenges and lessons that we see from those. The first is in the US, where we have been working the longest and where we've supported the Beyond Coal program, which has led to the retirement of over 70% coal plants in the US. As part of this work in Appalachia in West Virginia, we have supported work on skills training and jobs in coal mining communities with our partner Coalfield Development. And through this training has led to the training of 3,000 workers, the creation of 70 new businesses, and the creation of 800 new jobs in areas as diverse as sort of renewable energy, construction, and agriculture. Another example I'd like to share is from our work in Europe, where we have been supporting the Europe Beyond Coal campaign, which has led to the retirement of over 50% of coal plants in the continent. We started looking at the Bełchatów coal plant in Poland, which is the largest coal plant in Europe and employs 8,000 people. But it's also powered by lignite, and the lignite is running out. And we started sort of exploring what could be the pathways for the future of this specific coal plant, and working with our partners at Forum Energy and Bloomberg NEF, we supported scenario analysis, mapping out different futures for how this site could be repurposed. And the analysis found that there is strong potential for solar and wind energy in Bełchatów. This sort of opened up the debate and led to lots of discussions amongst sort of local governments, communities, with the European Commission, and has ultimately resulted in Bełchatów applying for and receiving funding from the European Commission's Just Transition Fund to help start to prepare and plan already for creating different sorts of opportunities on the existing site. And the final example I'd like to share is from some of our work in developing countries in India and Indonesia, where we've been supporting clean energy development, looking at things as diverse as training for female climate entrepreneurs in the Bali region to detailed technical project preparation for 15 clean energy projects in India, which will help create 5,000 new jobs, but also bring benefits for gender and livelihoods and food waste and sort of other areas, really showing that it's the kind of clean energy and climate impacts are only sort of one part of this story, but there's also multiple other benefits that can come from creating these kinds of clean energy projects and jobs. And of course, the challenges across all of this work have been many, you know, from technical capacity to social and economic challenges to business models to grid infrastructure. But I think we also see some kind of lessons emerging from this work that point to opportunities for future action. And I'd like to highlight 3 of those today. The first is, and Kate was speaking about this before, is really the importance of local context and local knowledge. And across each of these examples that I've shared, we've really worked closely with and relied on local partners who have deep context-specific, nuanced expertise in these local communities and meet local communities where they are. For example, in West Virginia, there were very specific challenges that the community was facing there, and the training therefore focused not only on career skills, but also on personal development. The second is really the importance of data and research and technical analysis. At Bloomberg Philanthropies, we're big believers in data, and in the work that we did and supported in Belkatuv, we saw that having a strong, solid technical mapping could really help open up the debate and then kind of lead to funding and investment coming in if there are solid plans that are developed. And the final point I'd like to make is the importance of collaboration. I mean, none of this work could happen with any one type of actor functioning alone. We need kind of governments, we need communities, we need civil society, we need technical experts such as you here at Carbon Trust. We need kind of multilateral and bilateral banks. We have a great collaboration going with EBRD. And we need all of this to really kind of come together. And it's only through this collaboration that we can bring the benefits that improves people's lives and bring kind of just transition to communities.
Yeah, absolutely. The three points there at the end of using the data to help decision making, the importance of local context and collaborating. And through that, with in particular bringing in that local context, what are the kind of key challenges in trying to do that into these various programs?
Yeah, I think it is very much about identifying the right partners, and sometimes it's challenging that there aren't necessarily partners that have that capacity, but sort of identifying the right partners who understand the local context and being able to spend the time also sort of upfront in terms of stakeholder consultations, in terms of research, sort of, you know, not going into a region or a community and thinking that sort of coming in from outside one knows the answers, but really spending time upfront, being able to understand and commission the research or conduct the research and identify the right partners to work with. I think those would be the kind of 2 important things I would say, is identifying the right partners and having enough time built into the process. Not so much that it slows down what we're trying to achieve, but enough that it's able to sort of structure it right. But yes, it can be challenging kind of identifying, because at times partners don't have the capacity, and there needs to be a kind of a matching of sort of skill sets. There may be organizations that have been working on other issues that know the communities well, that then need to be paired with other organizations that may have more sort of technical expertise, but there's kind of bringing that together can also be really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I'll go to Chris for the same question, but slightly different examples. So what do you see as the biggest challenges when considering social dividend through your work?
I think from a developer perspective, I'll put my developer hat on. I think the main challenge that a developer sees is that there's no clear obligation or expectation on them of what they're expected to do. So as a developer, you need to undertake a sort of build an understanding of the community that you're going to work in and that you're hoping to develop a project in. but that community doesn't really know anything about the project that you're developing. In new markets, it's not entirely clear that the government is aware of the implications of building an offshore wind farm. But then there is still this sort of requirement to establish just transition, and there's no guidance for it really. So I think two things come out of that. One is that these sorts of things need to be thought about really early. You need to start thinking when a market is being developed. You know, if you're looking, a lot of the work we do at the World Bank and at Ocean Energy Pathways, we work in emerging offshore wind markets where they haven't really got any offshore wind, they've only got a few projects and they're looking to scale, and they haven't got frameworks and they haven't got regulations in place, and they need to really develop that market so that the developers can come in and understand what's expected of them with guidance. And I think that is, not having that is a real challenge. The World Bank just published last year in November a really good report on community benefit, and it's kind of, you know, looking at the examples of community benefit that have been done by the offshore wind industry in mature markets, and pulling through the things that have worked and creating some sort of knowledge base for new markets to say, okay, yeah, we want it to look a little bit like this. This is how we would like it to look. And you know, that report really focuses on the need to be pragmatic. You know, we shouldn't be asking developers to solve problems that aren't really in any way linked to the development itself or the impacts it's having. And if you do go down that line, and to be frank, in the UK we have started to go down that route a little bit, where we're piling the obligations on developers to solve issues that are nothing to do with offshore wind. And then you end up creating a delay to the whole process, and then your just transition is delayed, and then you're losing the benefit of, you know, the things I talked about before, the climate change impacts, the investment and the energy security. So the challenge is this kind of like vacuum of guidance in early stage markets and for developers to follow. And I think that is something that, you know, not a lot of organisations I'm working with are working on, and it's a key thing. I think another of the challenges comes down to sort of like some fundamentals about jobs, really. You know, really, I think when we're talking about the just transition, we're talking about jobs. We're talking about jobs for people, and it's very difficult to model what jobs are going to look like from offshore wind. But we do know that, you know, for example, offshore wind creates more jobs than onshore wind, probably twice, and it probably creates 4 times as many jobs as solar. So all things being equal, if you want to create more jobs for the same type of transition, you want to be, you know, investing in a type of renewable energy that generates jobs. But that's not a particularly easy sell. And so the challenge really is about system planning. We system plan at the moment on the basis of least cost primarily. You know, what is the cheapest way to reform the energy system to reduce the carbon input? But we don't system plan on what are the associated benefits of the choices you're making in terms of your energy mix, in terms of these economic benefits. And I think that is a challenge that's still out there that we need to try and get to grips with.
Yeah, absolutely. On your first point around the, I guess the different, when you're entering all of these different markets as an offshore wind developer, my understanding is that some countries require a tax or what you pay into a fund, and then others it's about building programs. Is there a preference, do you think, in the market as to how we should be thinking about this? Is it, because I think it's France and China where it's quite a transactional method, versus in the UK it's about setting up jobs. I can imagine there's also an element of controlling it and being able to influence the skills in the sector is helpful. Is there, I mean, I feel like you part answered it, but is there a preference as to how countries should approach it, or is it, yeah?
I think this comes back to what Priya said. It's like every country is different. I mean, this is, even though it's offshore wind and we promote offshore wind in all these, you know, probably 24 countries that we're working with, and they're all so different that there isn't really a standard approach. I think what I would say is what developers need to see is they just need it to be clear and transparent as to what is expected of them. so that the market, the entry hurdles are appropriate for the country, and the risk profile that they're being asked to take is appropriate for the reward that they're getting. And mature markets are all very different from where you have in countries like the Netherlands or Denmark, where a lot of the permitting risk is taken care of before you, compared to the UK, where it's all on the developer. That's a very different profile of risk for the developer, but it's transparent. I think in emerging markets, the issue is because their frameworks and because their legislation is all new or in development, that for a developer, it's kind of like, okay, I need to understand what I'm getting into before I can really go in strong and start investing money and doing these sort of early activities which enable you to understand where you can really add value to make the just transition well targeted.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else want to come in on the challenges question, or we can move on to
maybe
sure.
if you don't mind it very quickly. The way we see it, there are three dimensions. Actually, there are many more perhaps, but three that are more relevant for us. One is, I think, your point on definitions. Definitions can be an enabler, but can also be a constraint. And I think we are not yet there in determining what ultimately just transition means. Either you take a narrow perspective or a broader perspective. So that's very important. There is also, I believe, still. Oh, sorry. Yes, you're right. I believe there is still also. Not limited is not the right word, but let's say insufficient experience in bridging the theory with the practice. And this is a bit linked also to your point, Priya, about the collaboration, the metrics. By the way, I mentioned North Macedonia because this is where ultimately we collaborated very effectively with Bloomberg Philanthropy. There's a good example of working together on a concrete project. And the third dimension is also to make the economic case for just transition. We are a private sector-oriented organization. We like functioning markets. We like projects that ultimately deliver a commercial return. So it's not easy to make the case. So that's why, again, the metrics piece is so important, and how you express the social dividend. And in fact, this is an area which we believe needs more further development. And I'll give you one example of where we're trying to combine all these elements in one approach. It's the work we're doing on green cities. So we have a program at DBRD, which for a lack of better alternative, we call Green Cities program, which is basically serving many cities in our region, over 50, ranging from Istanbul, so very big cities, Cairo, smaller city, Alba Iulia in Romania. And basically the whole program revolves around one product. It's called Green City Action Plan, which entails three things. There is the diagnostic element, looking at the performance of cities across several dimensions. It's about identifying the policy bottlenecks that prevent investments in sustainable projects and practices. And then there is an investment plan. So the idea is to come up with a 5-year investment plan, identifying priority projects. Now, how just transition fits into this is really trying to incorporate just transition elements across all these three dimensions, looking at the effects of accelerated climate policy ambition on the social and the local communities. It's about understanding what are the policies that bring more inclusive processes, and it's also about the investments that ultimately result in a social dividend. And if you look at these three dimensions, for example, the preparation of this Green City Action Plan is a very inclusive process. It's really a bottom-up process, which involves the local business community, the representative of civil society. So already when you involve people in the definition of the problem and the identification of the solutions, you create a much more fertile ground for policies to be implemented, but also for investments to take place. Talking about the metrics, the social dividend. Okay, maybe you can express the social dividend in terms of improved air quality, and that helps supporting program, for example, quite trivially, of e-mobility in the city. So I think bringing all these elements together can be a powerful way to, if not address completely the problem, but ultimately have an effective and constructive conversation with all the stakeholders in the city.
I think if I could just add on to the challenges, because I think everyone else has to. I'll wanted to pick up on something, and Giampiero, you sort of alluded to, is this sort of cross-systematic, or almost this whole system, a more holistic way of thinking about just transitions. I think one of the things that's struck me is through some of the work that we've done is that often just transitions seems like an add-on. It seems like a cost. It seems like something you have to do additionally, and then you have to fund it. So you have to find investment for it. Oftentimes, I think we lose sight of the fact that there is probably a lot already happening across different policy areas, across different sectors that can be drawn upon. As an example, I think we were doing an offshore wind related project in Japan where we were looking at how to kind of prepare for a skilled workforce to accommodate the needs for a growing offshore wind industry. And one of the recommendations was, well, you have so many of these educational programs, these kind of investment and sort of job programs. If you kind of sort of repackage that or bring that together and kind of leverage that investment that's already going on, that can be hugely beneficial and gives you a bit of a kickstart. I mean, we did a project in Odisha on a coal-fired power plant transition project. And one of the recommendations was, again, you have all this investment that's going into renewable energy, but not necessarily, and sort of industrial policies and jobs, but it wasn't being linked to the just transition aspects, as it were. So I think that's a really important thing, and I think it also goes for corporates as well. Often you hear the term just transitions, and people, get a bit nervous. I don't know what that means. But there might already be a whole range of CSR activities and things going on, support that they're already providing. It just didn't have that label. So again, it comes back to metrics and sort of transparency and accountability and so on. But I think sometimes it's seen much more as a cost than it actually is or should be. Oftentimes it's much more of a benefit, when you do reap these kind of additional sort of green jobs and so on. So, yeah.
So picking up on that point of accountability, the next question for the group is then, who should be responsible and accountable for this? Who should, when we're maximising these social benefits, who should pay? Who are the different players? What are the responsibilities? I might bounce back straight to Kate, given.
Sure. Yeah, I feel like I'm probably touched on as much as I can think of right now. Well, as I say, I think it's a range of different players. You can't just have one actor. So, for example, taking the coal transition, one coal asset owner is not going to, in effect, mitigate all the, ills that might come from shutting down a coal-fired power plant. There's a range of actors that need to be involved, and we all need to sort of be, working going in the same direction. So the policies need to align. There needs to be, social kind of policies in place, whether it be, retraining and skilling and so on, or other sort of forms of social protection. Equally, any employer as a corporate, seeking to invest in a new area, just making sure that their, workers are being looked after. So, it takes a whole range of different actors. I think there's also a role for financial institutions to play as well, as I alluded to earlier on the sort of the transition finance piece, pushing investees to go one better on just transitions and sort of invest further in that.
Absolutely. Anybody else
I would like to avoid the question because it's impossible to address.
Yeah, sure.
So, look, clearly the cost has to be distributed, cannot be focalized on only a few economic actors because there is no way, to address the problem. Maybe then, because I want to avoid the question, I will move into what could be the tools, right? to maybe try to address the problem. I think it's important to try to give price signals, in the economic system, in the financial sector. If you look at the practice in the financial sector, the role of central banks, the prudential regulation, etc. Yes, there are, we're quite advanced in terms of scenario analysis, the risk assessment, the discipline. Great, we have done a lot of work. We are incorporating the cost of carbon in some of the investment decisions, great. But there are some missing pieces here. What is the cost of delayed action? What is the cost of disruption? So could be perhaps a proxy to start introducing into the way we look at financial models, in the way we look at how risks are allocated in the portfolios of financial assets. So this is an area where we don't necessarily have the competence at EBRD, but we are certainly having interesting conversation, for example, at the level of the NGFS, the central bank club. And I know that they're working in this direction. So we would really like to have a conversation on the tools, how to introduce the price signal in, and a lot of these, the cost of disruption is linked to just transition. The cost of delayed action, it is also linked to that. So that's a potential, hopefully not too long-term solution.
Great, and a tool as well that we can follow up on. We have, I think, 2 minutes, is that right? Or have I 10 minutes? Oh, fantastic. Oh, I've got my timings wrong, how good. So the final then question, I think we've talked about a range of barriers through these discussions. And actually, well, something that I've heard throughout the conference is the need for speed, that we need to kind of get moving on these transitions. So my final question is there a trade-off between the speed of transition and ensuring a just transition? To what extent should we be including this stuff, or should we be getting going? I might go to Chris to answer that one.
Yeah. There's definitely a trade-off between the two, is the short answer, and I think there's also a sweet spot between the two of where you can find, you can make this happen quickly, but you can also ensure that it happens in the right way. Sort of, I guess, an example of this is so the World Bank do a lot of offshore wind roadmaps, which are these sort of holistic appraisals of a new market, covering everything from spatial analysis to bankability, but they often include many aspects around the just transition. And probably the last one that we're doing is being done by in partnership with the Carbon Trust, who are doing an excellent job. So I should say that. And the just transition is a huge thing in South Africa, and it's been woven through the work we've been doing about planning. Or helping the government in South Africa to plan their opportunity for offshore wind effectively. What do they need to do in order to make offshore wind happen? And to happen in a way that works in the South African environment, where they have a whole load of coal that they are needing to close down, and the coal jobs are nowhere near the renewable energy, whether it's solar or onshore wind or offshore wind. And so there's a whole range of things that need to be done in order to realise this offshore wind opportunity, and to realise it in a way that's compliant with a just transition. But because we've got into South Africa quite early, there isn't really, we don't think, going to be any offshore wind in South Africa for another 10 years in terms of operational. So we're at the right time to be able to deal with some of these challenges around, okay, what is the workforce effect of those coal-fired power stations closing, and what is the ability for countermeasures for that, so that you have that just transition. And you've got maybe a few years to work with the government to try and plan that out. So it's a nice example, because it's all about timing, effectively. If you get in early enough to these markets and to enable them to plan their transition, then it can be done without causing that delay. But if you're too late and then you try to implement a sort of rigorous just transition framework, you're going to end up delaying it, and then you need some compromise. You need to accept that some of the first projects that come through might not be as just as some of the later projects that come through, but that's fine, because what you're effectively doing is getting that transition going, which has the associated benefits that we've been talking about in terms of actually having a transition. So yes, I think it's two things. One, compromise. It doesn't have to be perfectly just if you're short on time, but if you get in early enough, then you really can make a good job to really plan it out and make sure it is a just transition.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that first mover issue, a question for anybody on the panel: how do we get beyond that? How do we try and encourage people to be kind of overcome that hesitancy? I guess it's part of what we've been speaking about in terms of definitions and things like that. But
Gianpiero, I might put you on the spot here, but I feel like the MDBs are, you know, and the World Bank as well are, you know, huge international organizations with great reputations, you know, that have a role to support, particularly sort of in emerging markets, local organizations, local developers, and local kind of financial institutions as well, to be that and back that sort of first movers. Yeah.
No pressure.
No.
If I may link these questions to the previous one, because I completely agree with your point. There are trade-offs to the extent that you... There are trade-offs if you don't use the microphone, right? And also, there are trade-offs if you take things in isolation. So if you look at just transition in isolation from the green economy, transition growth, or you know, the issue associated to, I don't know, green industrialization, clearly there are trade-offs. But if you try to combine things, and it's not easy, by all means, and I guess your point about the role of MDBs, I think what we're trying to do, the World Bank, the BRD, and others, is to facilitate some more programmatic approaches. You know, I guess you're familiar with this concept of the country platforms. Again, it's nothing new necessarily, but this is the idea to combine together, you know, multiple elements. The climate ambition with interventions that are focused on addressing specific problems, very much focused on the enablers, on the bottlenecks. So if you start putting these elements together, then and not sequentially or not in, you know, in isolation, in parallel, ultimately a lot of things can be addressed. You can also create an economic case. You can have policies that, you know, reinforce each other. So that's one solution that I guess, you know, in the multilateral development system we are trying to, you know, promote.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, how long? Yeah, all good. Well, thanks everybody. But I think there's a lot of actions to take. There's a big calls to action here around what do we actually mean by success, getting better definitions and agreement, making sure we're sending the right market signals, having shared accountability, and crucially getting in early. But yes, thanks everybody for joining, and thanks to the panelists.